Coming up next, a conversation with 3 White House fellows who are about to complete their year-long fellowships in senior levels of the federal government. You'll meet Sam Brownback, who's been with the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, Joseph Samora with the Executive Office of the President, and Kimberly Till, who's been a fellow at the FBI.
Kimberly Till, what's it been like being a White House fellow?
It's been great. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a great opportunity to work for a cabinet member and also meet some wonderful colleagues and sort of debate the issues with them for a year. And then also some great travel. So overall, it's just been a fabulous experience.
All right, if you could name one thing that you remember the most from the year, what would that be?
I think for me it would be the education program, having 1 full year to sort of meet the movers and shakers of the current administration, people that have served in earlier administrations, and really get a sense of what they're like and have a chance to ask them about things that have happened in history, ask them about current events. I think just meeting the people that have made a difference in this country and also in the world has been the one most significant factor.
Joseph Samora Jr., how about you?
Well, if I can think of one thing, and I look at the assignment and working in the White House, but if there's one particular event that I have to recall that will be probably the most vivid in my mind will be going to the Great Wall in China with one of our colleagues. I think Drew Batavia is just a tremendous guy, and he's in a wheelchair, and I think he'd been advised when kind of a young age that he wouldn't be able to, I'm not sure if he was going to be able to even make the trip, much less up to the Great Wall. And through the help of all of us, seeing him up there, it was just, it was quite moving, and I don't think I'll ever forget that particular event. All 12 of us together as a class doing something and sharing that with each other, and I don't think there'll ever be another opportunity like that.
Sam Brownback, how about you?
I think probably participation in the World Trade Talks in Brussels that both Kimberly and I got to go to would probably be the one thing that I remember, along with what Joseph mentioned about Drew, which was a spectacular group dynamics event, and just something all of us felt a great part of, to help Drew, a quadriplegic, to the top of the Great Wall of China, a goal he had had in his life. But by the World Trade Talks in Brussels that did not come to a successful conclusion, but seeing that process, 107 countries trying to develop rules for everybody in commerce around the world, which is the big battleground we're all engaged in right now, it was probably the one single thing.
What is a White House fellow, and how did you get to be one?
Well, there are 12 White House fellows this year. Normally it's anywhere between 11 and 19. And the process really is that you complete a written application along with recommendations from people that you've worked for or professors of yours. And then out of the pool of applications, which is running, about 1,000 right now, they would select about 135 for regional interviews, and you would spend 1 whole day going before a regional panel where they ask you all sorts of questions, anything from foreign policy questions to domestic policy to things off your background or resume, or really philosophy of life. I mean, it's wide open. And then out of the 135, they pick 35 for national finals. And that's a fairly intensive weekend where you spend 4 days, again, doing the same types of questions, but you're being interviewed by a panel of commissioners appointed by the president. And there are 35 of those, and they range from everything to generals to CEOs of corporations to people that have served currently in the government or have served in the government in the past. So they're a very good interview panel board. And then out of the 35, they pick, like I said, 11 to 19 at the end of that 4-day period. And somehow a couple of us slipped through, so it's quite a long process.
Where is home originally for you, hometown, and where did you work before you got to be a fellow, and where did you work as a fellow?
Okay, from Alabama originally, and have been working in England, in London, the past 3 years doing management consulting, advising companies on strategy. And then this year, I started out with Clayton Yiter, working with him as Secretary of Agriculture on the GATT negotiations that Sam mentioned. And then when he resigned to become head of the RNC, I then switched over to work for the director of the FBI, where I've been sort of exploring counterterrorism and counter-espionage. So it's been really a fascinating year.
Did you think when you got into this whole thing that you would win?
No. In fact, I've often teased that when I went home Sunday night and flew back to Albuquerque that I was firmly convinced that I was not quote-unquote what they were looking for, and had pretty much resolved myself to that. I had been working at the time for a former White House fellow, Governor Gary Carruthers, in New Mexico, and almost dreaded the thought of having to give him a call to say that while I gave it my best shot, I probably was not going to be selected. I've since learned that the governor received a phone call that night telling him, so he actually knew before I got the phone call. And so when I got the chance to call in Monday morning, and of course that was actually 2 hours before the 1 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, because it was 11 o'clock my time, was just absolutely very pleasantly surprised to learn that I had. In fact, I had to make sure and talk to the executive director and told her that we were going to have a great time this year, because I wanted to hear it from her herself. From Marcy.
Did he get you interested because he had been a fellow, Gary Carruthers?
Very much so. Has been very instrumental, I think, obviously, in terms of some advice, political advice, and just some general philosophical advice, of course.
You mentioned earlier you've been in the White House, and I think the picture of the person you've been working for is another former White House fellow,
Yeah.
Bobby Kilberg.
Distinct pleasure of having worked for a former White House fellow and now working for a former White House fellow.
What exactly does she do in the White House?
She is Deputy Assistant to the President for Public Liaison and does coalition building for the President in terms of administration initiatives. Perhaps a great example might be the Thomas nomination that we're working on now. We've done, it's a unique opportunity to allow certain constituencies, organizations, individuals to come to the White House to visit with administration officials and perhaps the President himself. In addition, this allows the opportunities for us to do briefings for them in terms of administration's policies and hopefully to gain some support for administration initiatives as well.
Where is home, and what were you doing immediately before you got to be a fellow, and what are you going to do next?
Of course, I was born, raised, and educated entirely in Albuquerque, and previously had served, as I said, working for Governor Gary Carruthers, was a part of his administration. I was the chairman of New Mexico's Public Utility Regulatory Commission, the New Mexico Public Service Commission. And I think I'm going to be staying in Washington for a little bit longer, perhaps, hopefully, as a part of the administration.
Mr. Brownback, how about you?
Sure. From Parker, Kansas, actually, its population 250 people. I actually lived out in the suburbs, a little ways on a farm from Parker. My family farms in that area, and that's where I was raised in the family farm operation. Most recently from Topeka, Kansas, where I was Secretary of Agriculture in the state, and that's where I'll be going back to after the year's term as a White House Fellow.
Doing what?
Being the Secretary of Agriculture for the state of Kansas. Job that I was doing prior for about 3.5 years, and will continue in that capacity. Looking forward to it.
Is it all true? Is it true that you all are lawyers?
Well, the three of us have been trained in the law, but at least Kimberly and I haven't been, probably one Joseph either, haven't been practicing the last couple of years.
But you all have law degrees.
No, 7 out of the 12
This year.
this year have law
The
degrees.
3 of you all have law degrees.
Oh, all of
That's
us,
correct.
yes. That's true.
Has the law degree helped?
I think it's certainly helped in our ability to articulate positions or arguments sort of on one side of the argument or the other. So I think it's been useful in terms of, and also eliciting questions of the speakers and sort of debating back and forth with them.
What's the most interesting thing you did this year?
Well, again, I think I would have to go to the trade talks and
What about-
participation in that.
I knew you'd said that before, but what specifically, what were you allowed to do? Just to sit or hang around, or did you get into the substance of it? Or
No, and I was going to cite to a more narrow focus on that, the bilateral trade issues that we're working on right now with the European community. And what I've been allowed to do is to work directly on some of those, drafting some of the wording back and forth of how we're going to try to get through a particular issue, following and dogging that through the system to see some sort of conclusion, or frequently in conclusion, come forward on a number of the trade issues. And they allow really quite a degree of participation in that process that I've been happy to be able to participate in.
well, let me just try to do the substance of this. You're in agriculture, and you've paid a lot of attention to that. Is it the 107 nations? Is this the Uruguay round that we keep hearing about?
Right.
The GATT talks.
Right.
And the underlying issue is whether or not they will stop subsidizing the agriculture products in Europe?
Well, that's the logjam that we've got to break before we can get through to the other issues. There are 15 different areas that we're negotiating in the Uruguay round, but the agricultural subsidy issues is what brought the Brussels meeting to an impasse, and what has been something we still haven't been able to break through as yet, and the Europeans have Europeans, others, Japanese, South Koreans have been intransigent.
What's the
on those
difference
points.
between price supports in the United States or parity and what the Europeans do for their agricultural market?
Theirs is far more trade distorting than ours is. Theirs, they put $12 billion into export subsidies, which is basically a bribe to buy the international marketplace. They recently went into China with some heavy export subsidies, dropped the world price of wheat to $75 a ton. It was selling into China at $85 a ton. We put $1 billion into those export subsidies, so we're being outspent 12 to 1. Can't buy as many markets as what they can. They get more of the market share and support that. We find that far more trade distorting than what our agricultural policies are.
What would you say to somebody in Europe or Japan or wherever there's this, you think it's distorted, if you really could tell them what you think after watching this process? Are they being just stubborn?
I think they are not only being stubborn, and I mean, in my opinion, I think they're being unrealistic and harmful to the rest of the world trading system. And here, these are great trading nations. The United States, the largest trading nation in the world. Japan, the second largest trading nation in the world, with a very protective agricultural regime, causes them to pay as much as 7 times the world price for rice. They're not only being protective and harmful to the system, they're hurting their own consumers, which the Europeans are doing as well, and I would say that to them too.
What about this thing called diplomacy? Did you ever look somebody in the eye from another country and say, get off it, you're not being fair?
Well, I've learned of some of diplomacy, and diplomacy involves a lot of subtleties and suppleness, and so you don't frequently hear people talking in those sort of terms. You say we had frank discussions, and there are difficulties and impasses, but that at the end of the day we are hopeful of good conclusions could come forward. It's much more subtle sort of languages that are used, that perhaps maybe the direct approach is appropriate, but frequently not.
What do you say, Mr. Samora, to the people watching that are so frustrated with government they could pop? They look at Washington and say that place doesn't work, and they say there's a lot of hot air coming out of politicians. What would you say after being inside for a year?
Well, I'd say that I hope they'd register to vote, and I hope that they use that right. It's been an extraordinary experience. In fact, when I cross the street every night, I kind of stop at 17th and Pennsylvania and kind of look behind me at the old executive office building and almost pinch myself in terms of where I worked that day. I don't think my feet have quite touched the ground the entire time. I don't think you can quite look at the inside of the Oval Office on occasion and without getting kind of goosebumps and realizing that this is quite a center of power and the impact and the influences that our government actually has. And it's such an unique opportunity as we have had to go ahead and experience this, to share with each other the fellowship that has been created this year amongst our group, and to then actually witness so many different aspects of government, to realize how in fact it touches people's lives. And there are so many problems that are out there, people who genuinely care about so many different issues, and there are so many people here in Washington that absolutely care about these issues. If they would just get involved and give an opportunity, volunteer or do whatever they could in terms of trying to work towards the accomplishment of whatever goal it may be. And I think that we've had an opportunity to see a lot of that, to listen to a lot of it, to hopefully learn a lot of that, and I'm sure go back to our respective communities to get involved and to urge other people to get involved, because there are plenty of solutions out there, and there's a lot of creativity, and we just need to put that, in my opinion, to work.
You mentioned Judge Thomas as an issue that Bobby Kilberg's office would be involved in. What other kinds of things this year will you remember that you had some impact on?
Well, I was fortunate enough working with Bobby on one particular event that comes to mind. It was this spring, and it was what we commonly referred to, at least in the office, as the 100 Days event. And working with my colleagues who were just extraordinary. They're young and they're interested and they're entirely loyal and committed. And we had an opportunity to invite some thousand, I think it almost ended up being 2,000 folks, to the South Lawn to hear the President's talk on his domestic agenda and the domestic challenges facing the United States. And I was able to invite my colleagues, the White House Fellows. In fact, the President mentioned one of them in his speech. And it was just, it was neat to put that together, to kind of watch that. I tend to think that I have the best assignment this year working in public liaison, because it gave me a chance with FaceTime with the President to actually watching the ongoings of the different offices in terms of the coalition building for the administration, and to obviously there's some nice things that go along working there in the White House.
Have you been close to the President at all? Physically?
I think lots of FaceTime, yeah.
All right. What can you tell us about President Bush that you know that we don't know by being close?
I think if there's one observation that I've been able to just, again, just witness in the short amounts of time that I had with him is that he is so comfortable with the job, and I just can't believe how we had a chance very recently to visit with the president in a setting there in the Roosevelt Room, all 12 of us, and he walked in, and of course we were starry-eyed because this is the President of the United States, and he just seemed so comfortable with his position and so strong in terms of his leadership capabilities, but yet has not lost that touch. And you would think someone who has, with the G7 and with all the experiences internationally and the kinds of trying times he's had, especially during our year. You know, during our year we had both Desert Shield and Desert Storm and situations obviously involving the domestic agenda. Yet he is so extraordinarily at ease with himself and was able to put us at ease. And by the end of that session, we were so, it was just like talking with, again, one of our colleagues. And we had, at least I did, have to keep thinking, my God, this is the President of the United States.
Kimberly Till, how about you? But what event that you were involved in during the year are you going to remember the most?
I don't know if there's one sort of single one, because it seems like almost every day there's something new that's happening, either in terms of the types of people that we're meeting or else happening in our job. I think for me might be some of the FBI work that I've been doing, because I had no former background in intelligence at all, having done law and business. And so just being exposed to how an organization like that works and the sorts of activities that they're engaged in. For example, during the war, the whole sort of counterterrorism strategy that was put in place, and there were no terrorist acts that occurred within the United States. And so just sort of having a little bit of a chance to be on the inside of that, of how they work and how they liaise with others in the intelligence community. I think that sort of, and having a chance to work with the director and sort of seeing how he operates an organization that's that large and operates in so many different areas has been one of the experiences that has been really extraordinary this year.
How much does a White House fellow make?
The highest you can make is G17 or something.
This booklet here says a GS-15 and
Is it GS-15?
60-some thousand, but it may have been printed before the pay raise.
It's about 60.
That's right.
So
About
63,000?
60, right. And some of the people make less. It really depends. That's the most that you can make. So most people who are a little bit further along in your careers, it's a significant salary cut to come in and do that. But certainly it's you know, more than paid for by the experience that one has.
Can you make it in Washington, D.C. on $63,000 a year?
Certainly. We've had a good time this year doing that.
Do any of you have families?
I do. A wife, 3 children, and we've made it on that, although it's been a break-even proposition to do that, to move out from Kansas, where the moving van's at our place today, loading up to take the goods back to Kansas. The ruby red slippers don't click 3 times to get everybody back, so it takes the moving van.
Have you had any trouble living on $63,000?
No, I've actually enjoyed it. I live right down Washington Circle, and so it's kind of, I get to walk to work each morning. No, it's not been tough.
Are any of you a member of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, or do you have to state that in your application, your party affiliation?
The selection is actually bipartisan. So in any class, you have a couple of outspoken Democrats, a couple of outspoken Republicans, and then a lot of people in between. So definitely in a Republican administration, Democrats are picked and vice versa.
How about you all? Any of you want to state your politics here? I know a couple of governors. Governor Carruthers is what party, and
He's Republican.
does that make you a Republican?
Yes, sir.
I started under a Democrat administration in Kansas and served mostly in a Republican. Will go back under a Democrat administration. The position I was in is a nonpartisan one that's appointed by a separately elected board. So.
And Kimberly Till?
It depends on the issue. I'm sort of, I vote independently. I choose Republican issues on trade, and I choose Democratic issues on some other social and other issues. So I would say I'm not declared at this point.
Excluding President Bush and excluding your boss where you work, who has impressed you the most during the last year in this town or in your travels? Somebody in politics who you'll never forget by seeing them up close, talking to them. Who wants to start? I see one head nodding over here. Kimberly?
Again, there are just so many. And I guess the thing that strikes me about a lot of these individuals that we've met is that they're not all exactly alike as you would expect. It's not that each one is picked to be a cabinet member or has become a great leader in the world because they're extraordinarily intelligent, all of them, or because they're extraordinarily charismatic, or because they're extraordinary managers. It's sort of like each one you can sort of look at, and as you talk to them, you can sort of sense what it is that enabled them to get there, but it's not the same feature for each. And so I would say there are lots of people I've been extraordinarily impressed
Anybody
with.
name?
Like, for example, Colin Powell, we met with just the other day, and he has extraordinary personal style, the way that he...
Former fellow.
Exactly. Just coincidentally, but the way he talked about his involvement in the Persian Gulf War and his relationship with Secretary Cheney and President Bush, and just, his personal manner, and you could just tell that he's extraordinarily effective in putting people together. Carla Hills, Sam's boss, came and spoke to us just the other day about trade issues, and her grasp of sort of the substance of world trade and how the administration should be moving in certain directions was extraordinary. She was very impressive.
Mr. Samora?
I think Anne McLaughlin was quite impressive. I thought the way her just command of her issues, she was incredibly articulate, I thought quite persuasive, and I thought someone who had just, perhaps should have been a little bit more familiar with going into that session. And of course the sessions that we have are off the record, and I think because the program enjoys hopefully such a fine reputation in terms of the kinds of quality of both folks that it might attract, as well as the confidentiality, if you will, of the session itself, we can get some quite heated debates and get some quite frank questions and answers. And she was quite impressive.
And Anne McLaughlin, the former Secretary of Labor and also at the Interior Department. And how about you, sir?
Three stand out. I've had more time now to sit here and think about it a second. But Peter Goldmark, the head of Rockefeller Foundation, we met with in New York and also met with here in Washington. I was very impressed with him, his thought processes, his decision-making processes, his objectives that he has. Ronald Reagan, we met in California, just because I think he's a legendary figure in the United States and world this century. And Jack Valente, the lobbyist and he would repulse at that term, but the head of the Motion Pictures Association. Been around this town a long time. It seems like really understands how Washington works, and has a lot of things that he stands for and stands by. I was impressed with all three of those.
By the way, if our audience has just joined us, we're talking with 3 members of the White House Fellowship Program. They're about to leave this town after a year. There were 12 picked this year, and there can be between 11 and 19, I believe, and in next year's class will be 16. And we try to get together with a couple at the end of every year to find out what the experience is like, and that's what we're in the middle of doing. We have a little bit over 30 minutes to go with our 3 guests. White House Fellows, if someone is tuning this in and they see you all sitting here, we've talked about the money part of it. We talked about a little bit about the application. What's the first thing you would do if someone out there thinks they should be a part of this? Number one, how much education do they need?
A high school degree.
But have they ever picked anybody that didn't have a college degree?
I don't know if they have or have not on that. My suspicion would be yes, that they have over the 26-year history of the program, that they would have picked somebody. But there's no educational requirement that's in it. First thing I'd do is I would call or write to the White House Fellows Office and get the brochure itself to look at that, to look at the application form, see the type of people that they've selected. Maybe get an alumni list and see if you have anybody in your area that has been a White House Fellow, and go talk to them about it.
And the White House Fellow Program, is it paid for by the government?
Yes, for as far as our salary is and the staff is, there is also a White House Fellows Foundation that pays for a portion of the cost of the educational program during the year's time period, so it is partially privately sponsored as well.
At the end of this program, for sure, there will be an address on the screen in case somebody couldn't get to their pen and pencil fast enough. All right, education we talked about a little bit. Now, there must be other things that you can tell this audience that if they don't have, they might as well not even get into this.
I'm not really so sure that there actually is. I think you should have perhaps an interest in politics, or have an interest in public service, or at least have a curiosity in terms of perhaps wanting to return at some point in time and maybe be an opinion leader in your respective community. I think that there is probably there's some general qualities in the application, for example, that they look at. They like to see what kind of volunteer work you have done in your respective community, what kinds of leadership roles that you have. if I recall correctly, the only specific eligibility is that you be a U.S. citizen and perhaps not be currently employed by the federal government. And the opportunity is, if you will, of the White House Fellowship is to leapfrog you into being a special assistant to either the President's senior staff, the Vice President, or to a Cabinet Secretary.
But when Colin Powell was a fellow, wasn't he in the military?
Other than military.
That's
Military,
correct.
there's an exception for military, but you can't otherwise be a federal employee other than military personnel can. We have 4 military people that are in our class this year.
But is it safe to assume that if you haven't done anything, in other words, if you just got out, if you just have a high school degree and you've never really worked any place of any significance, or if you've just got a college degree or even a law degree, you're not going to get picked for this, are you?
I think they're looking for really sort of 4 sort of categories and demonstrated potential in each of these categories. And any one fellow or any one candidate obviously doesn't have high achievement in each of these, but I think, like you mentioned, good performance academically, you'd have to have a fairly strong academic record. Good performance professionally, you'd have to have demonstrated potential in your career. Now, there's no career designation. We have all different types of careers, but having achieved a certain amount of demonstrated achievement there. Community service is a very important factor, and then leadership. And so finding individuals that sort of have a little bit of a quantity of each of those and sort of fairly high demonstration in some of the categories would get you into the pool. I would say almost all the regional finalists and certainly the national finalists had demonstrated something in each of those categories.
All right, how
If
much
you're
of
weak
it-
in one, you're going to have to be extraordinary in another to be able to get you on into the pool.
What about
Right.
personal communication skills? I mean, if you can't talk to somebody in a room, is that a negative, or do you have people here that are shy?
I think there are people in the program that maybe shy would be the wrong term, but more reclusive than shy of nature. I would say probably shy people in general wouldn't apply for a program of this type of nature, but you don't have to be an outspoken voice constantly pushing issues forward to be an applicant person in the program.
Or after 3 to 4 days worth of interviews in those national finals, you kind of are given a heck of a lot of opportunities to go ahead and express your opinions on a variety of different issues. And so if you're able to go ahead and obviously communicate those philosophies and those answers, it's going to help you.
Any of you worried about being near greatness and now having to walk out back to normal life somewhere, and that it'll be a tremendous letdown?
Oh, I think by definition, whatever you do the week following this program is going to be a little bit of a letdown, just because, like I said, the opportunities you have both through your job and through the education program make each week just an extraordinary opportunity. So I think, you know, by definition, all the former fellows tell us you go through a little post-White House fellow blues. But I think also, I mean, the people that we're serving with are people that really are extraordinary individuals in my view. And I can see each person sort of charting out what they plan to do afterwards and the things they'd like to do in life. And I think a lot of people are really eager now to sort of, having had this year to reflect and to learn and to be stimulated, to now go out and do something again, to go out and be active and make a contribution.
And the program is clearly set up to be a 1-year specific kind of time frame. So you hopefully at least halfway through that year realize we've got 6 more months to go, and you try to make the best during that time and know that after those 12 months it's going to be time to be over.
You said that things are off the record in a lot of these meetings. There have been some 350 fellows since 1964. Has anybody ever written a book about their 1-year experience?
Not to my knowledge.
Can you do
they have.
that? Can you keep notes and write books about this kind of thing?
Well, I mean, these are, by definition, the meetings are off the record and given to secrecy and non-attribution. So I wouldn't think that you could, that it would be appropriate to do that you'd be violating the rules of the program.
But you didn't sign anything.
I didn't say anything, but each of us have a certain personal integrity, as everybody in the media business and other businesses all do too. And so I wouldn't anticipate that people would do that.
All right, this is the you don't want to give specifics, but have you learned anything off the record that you want to tell people? Things that, you know, if you only knew what I know, boy, you'd really understand this.
I don't think specific. There have been some surprising comments. I think I think there's been a lot of reaffirmations. I mean, coming from Albuquerque, New Mexico, you know, we kind of get the Washington Post every once in a while 3 days later, and you kind of go through that. It's kind of nice to actually be in the town now and to actually see all these players say, quite frankly, what's on their mind many times. And sometimes you wonder, perhaps back in some of our smaller towns, I wonder if it works this way, or I wonder if it works that way. And I think there's been, at least in my mind, some reaffirmations about how certain actually operate. And it's been a good feeling many times. Also some pleasant surprises to see how the credibility, if you will, of the people that are in charge. I've been quite impressed.
I want to ask you the same question. If you ever have the feeling you want to go out and say, if you really knew what I know now, you wouldn't feel the way you do about government?
I think a little bit. I mean, it's not really the off-the-record things, but I agree with Joseph. It's more just really learning how government works. Like, even though I have practiced law in Washington for 3.5 years earlier, and was very interested in politics and knew a fair amount about government. What I know now at the end of this year is extraordinary in relation to what I knew before. So I think I would say to people, there are things that I've learned, like that the people in the top parts of the government, or really throughout the government, work much harder than I anticipated. You sort of come in from the private sector and think we all work so hard and the government, just sort of cruises along, but I found quite to the contrary. So I would really say, one insight that I didn't know before was that these people put in extraordinary hours at much less pay, and really just for trying to push the programs that they believe in or trying to make a difference in the departments where they work. And I think if people knew more of those sorts of things, like what the government's really like on a day-to-day basis and how difficult it is to implement certain things, but that a lot of people are genuinely working very hard and very competently to do that within the system, they would be a lot more impressed with the government.
All right, now I want you to try to answer this question. For each one of you, if I were U.S. Trade Representative, I would do the following things, change things. My leadership as Trade Representative would be different than, say, Carla Hill's. What would you do?
I'm not sure there'd be a number of very many things that I would do differently, because I fundamentally agree. Though I'm concerned on a number of our trade fronts, and I might push on specific things a little bit harder, but she's a hard driver and a hard pusher. I'm afraid I'd have to back away from that one. Sorry, because I fundamentally agree with the position we've taken, and they've taken a number of positions on agriculture that I do agree with. I do agree with the tack we're taking.
How about outside of positions? I would run the office differently. I would lead differently. I would have a relationship with my employees or underlings in a different way.
There probably would be, each person would have a different management style, and I'd probably have a different management style in that setting. But that's a personal issue.
All right, let me take it away from her for a moment, so you're not holding yourself up against what she's done. What do you consider to be your management style? What are the things that you use in your management style that make you tick?
Well, for me personally, it's a decision making by consensus with a group of people. It's a very active-oriented style where I want to get into the issues. I don't want to see them thwarted or diverted because they may have too much cost associated with dealing with it. I want to deal with the issues. I want to get in, do it by consensus, not by a dictatorial or an autocratic sort of style. And I'd like to do it with as few resources as possible. For as far as if you're in a government management setting, I'd like to see us handle our problems in the most cost-efficient, least costly method.
If you were going to answer the question, if I were in Bobby Kilberg's job, I would change this.
I don't think I would change much. I mean, her energy level and her dedication, and of course the kind of time that she puts in, and on top of that, having 5 children, has just been extraordinary to watch her management style. And she is, her attention to detail has been extraordinary, and that for me has been someone who I thought was a little bit of energetic and proactive in terms of my management style, in terms of a state agency back in New Mexico. It's been quite impressive to watch, and so I don't think I would change one thing in terms of
How would you
style.
define your own personal management style?
Well, it was, again, I think, to be somewhat fiscally conservative. I was very proud of the kinds of things that we did in our little state agency over those 3.5 years. We were able to automate certain things, be able to reduce paperwork filings by over 50%. We were able to get rid of a 7-year backlog, and we were able to revert money every single one of those 4 years to the state revenues fund. And so I think government can work. And I've also been impressed, for example, in the White House, to see the kind of, in my opinion, the antiquated resources or the lack of resources, and to see how people, in spite of that, do their jobs and as Kimberly stated, work so hard, extraordinary hours, frankly around the clock if necessary. And it's been quite heartening to see that in those circumstances, government can indeed work.
If I were director of the FBI, meaning you,
Right.
what would you change?
Well, I think each person sort of has to adopt their own, I agree with Sam, own sort of management style, because everybody has strengths and weaknesses in different areas. But I fully support what Director Sessions is doing right now, sort of focusing on the internal operations of the FBI. They're dealing with a lot of very difficult issues with diversity of the workforce and in sort of moving the FBI from an organization 20 years ago into the 1990s and some of the difficult sort of crime issues that they face, very difficult than 20 years ago. So I would fully endorse sort of the managerial direction that the director is moving in. I think with all of them, it's just you wish you had more people and more time and more energy to sort of support. It's difficult for one person to direct and move any organization.
Any of you going to run for political office?
I think my two colleagues are.
My two colleagues are.
Oh, no, I don't know that anybody is, and that's just something that's quite a ways down the road for a decision, probably for most people. The history of the program is interesting in that because you would think that normally 26 years of White House Fellows, 12 or 11 to 19 per year, that you would have a lot of people that had been in elective office. And yet I found that actually far more are in appointive office or in the business sector, academia, than in elective office than what I would have anticipated. Gary Crothers, Senator Worth are a couple of notable examples. Tom Campbell's a congressman from California, but there really, in my impression, has been, I'd appreciate feedback of the others, not been as many in elective office as what I would have thought in the history of the program. They've gone other means of service than through elective office.
From what you've seen now, you've seen the executive branch and the Congress up close and your work in state government. Which kind of a political office attracts you the most?
Well, I enjoy state government myself. That's where I came from. That's where I'm going back to because I find it much more something you can work with and get your hands on. You can set objectives for a particular program and see within 2 years its implementation or failure. And it's a pretty quick turnaround. Here, it strikes me you can labor and froth around for years and maybe see something come around or maybe not see something come around, or more likely something just kind of muddle on along. And so that's why a state, to me, is far more attractive to work with.
And hometown in Kansas is where?
Parker?
Where's Parker?
Parker is south of Kansas City, about 50 miles near Cadmus, Centerville, Blue Mound, Mound City. Now those are striking an accord, I'm sure, with you, but Kansas City, south of Kansas City, about 50 miles.
Kansas State University?
Yes, undergrad.
In what subject?
Agriculture economics.
Now, you went through this whole program of being selected as a White House Fellow out of how many, 3,500 applicants?
About 1,000 this year.
Oh,
I think
1,000?
20,000 right for the application and 1,000 finally completed with everything
Doesn't
there.
matter. A lot of people went after this job. But go back to your experience and go back to your early years in education. What along the way would you advise somebody, again, let's assume somebody young or not so young is watching this, as the best way to prepare to become a White House Fellow from the ground up? Education?
Yeah, education is important. As I noted earlier, you don't have to have it, but clearly it's one of the factors that are considered. So I would clearly push for a strong education. I would do a great deal of community involvement and community activity along the way. I would work in and with a number of organizations that are of a public service mind, contributing and in leadership roles along the way. What they're looking for is people that they think out in the future are going to make a contribution to this country, a major contribution. Yesterday, Mike Walsh was announced as CEO of Tenneco, as former White House Fellow. He's going to make a major contribution to this country, and they felt like that's a good investment in him when he was a young man, to bring him in and give him this high level of experience and give him this inspiration for public service. He works there's a Boys Town, Boys Camp in Omaha. He contributes, works with that, is on the board of directors. People like that generally earlier on in their career do those sort of things too, as well. You don't generally change radically, and I would encourage people to look at those sort of things that are listed.
But that's not a bad successful to make a great American either. There have been, I mean, if you're successful in the community and if you're successful with grades, I mean, I think that those are just great things to try to achieve. There have been a lot of people who have applied for this program who have not made it, and there are a lot of people who just have not applied for the program. So I think generally that's a pretty good successful formula to follow.
You know, you studied communications
Yes, sir.
at the University of New Mexico.
That's right.
Before you got your law degree. Why communications?
I think it was just giving me an opportunity to give another soapbox, if you will, give me a chance to debate.
And anything in high school that, by the way, where'd you grow up? In Albuquerque?
Born and raised.
Who got you interested in all this in the first place?
Well, I think somewhere along the line when I was in the 4th or 5th grade and ran for class president was probably the first time that I got involved in something political, and just continued from being a student council president in high school and then staying involved in extracurricular activities and then doing that kind of thing after I got out of school.
You're not going to go back right away to New Mexico?
Not right away, but clearly eventually.
If you ran for public office, what office attracts you the most at the moment?
Oh, well, I think there are a lot of quite talented people in New Mexico, and I just hope to go back and be that pool. I'm not really sure if there's one specific office that I would look for.
Would you choose state over federal?
Well, having been a state official, again, much like Sam, for 3.5 years, you can sure get a whole lot done quite quickly in a state office, but I still have a little bit of learning to do in terms of certain federal offices.
Where'd you go to school?
University of Alabama undergrad,
And you studied?
history in preparation for law school.
Why did you study history? What got you interested in that in the first place?
Primarily because I knew I wanted to be a lawyer, so it was, and I'm very interested in history, so history is a very good background for that.
You spent a lot of time overseas.
Right. I then went and did a law degree and a business degree, and my sort of area of interest is really international law and business.
You've lived in, what, Japan and
Tokyo
London?
and London, right.
And what did that do for your interests? I mean, did that change your perspective of the world?
Oh, definitely. Actually, when I went to Tokyo, I was 25, and I went on a Henry Luce Fellowship funded by Time Magazine, and it was an extraordinary sort of eye-opening experience to all of a sudden learn about Japan, learn about a different culture, learn about trade and Asian issues. And it's a little bit like this program that sort of once you've been exposed at that level sort of for a year, it sort of enters into your thinking from then on. So I've always sort of weighed Asian issues in Japan in the background. In Europe the same way, having done business now for 3 years in Europe. Any issue, I'm sort of the opposite of Sam. I think my focus is so much international and foreign policy oriented that now any issue I sort of, weigh in the sort of European and Japanese side of it as well.
Being close to the federal government, you've had a chance to see what offices matter, what offices are interesting. If you had to pick a couple of jobs in Washington that you think are pretty interesting jobs to have, other than being president, of course, what would they be? Where's the power?
I think power floats in this town, and that may be a bad answer, but with the personalities and the people that are in them, and if they have good relationships with both people in this community and exterior, it strikes me that certain offices can come and go a little bit with the individual within it. But clearly the Secretary of State's always an influential, Treasury, influential, Defense, OMB. I would put in with the portfolio of the Trade Representative's offices. I think that clearly the wars of the future are commercial wars, and that's going to be the frontline warriors in it.
Mr. Samora, what offices do you find interesting?
Well, interestingly enough, I'm reminded of a quote, and I'm going to paraphrase because I can't quote it directly, from President Reagan, I believe, that you can get just about anything done in this town that you want done if you don't care who gets the credit. And I have seen almost behind the scenes, if you will, on certain occasions, a whole lot of great ideas and a whole lot of influencing going on, and it really kind of, it's quite interesting to see how decisions can be made along those lines. If you stay in the background and see the influences of those kinds of key people.
Pick a job or two, though. Somebody, a power job, that really matters.
Clearly, all the commissioned officers in the White House sure have a whole lot to say in terms of, at least from the executive branch, in terms of influencing the executive branch.
What's a commissioned officer in the White House?
Those who are assistants to the president, deputy assistants, and special assistants to the
People
president.
like John Sununu and Roger Porter?
Yes, sir.
And I bring Roger Porter up because he's another one of those White House fellow alums.
That's right.
We're everywhere.
And here's a meeting with Roger Porter in the booklet they pass out with President Bush. Can you pick a job or two?
Well, for me, just sort of given strong foreign policy interest, I think Secretary of State or USTR would be fascinating jobs. But I agree with Joseph. I think some of the most powerful are the people close to the president who control what issues and what types of information gets through to him. And that's been interesting to watch this year, just on the issues that we've had an opportunity to observe, that some of those people whose names aren't quite so well known in the papers and to the public are extraordinarily powerful.
Are people in Washington better informed than people who live in Albuquerque or in Topeka or in Prattville, Alabama?
think it depends on the issue. I mean, we're certainly, people in Washington are certainly more informed on ins and outs and sort of all the little things that happens, but I wonder if you're informed about what are really the most important issues in the world and what are really the most important issues for America. One could argue the people in Prattville and Topeka and Albuquerque probably have a much better sense than those of us that maybe are over inundated with information and views and probably don't have the objectivity that
I think people in New Mexico have a much better sense of what's really going on in the country and in the world than within the Beltway. But I think that that's just because they have a chance to be much more objective about it. And it's this age of communications especially. So there's so much information flowing that I think maybe sometimes people in Washington like to think that we have more information or more idea of what's going on, but no, I don't think so.
I think it's more, maybe a little more current information, but less reflective thought going into it. I liken it a little bit to why Warren Buffett's located in Omaha and not in New York City, and he says, well, I like to get it, as I understand.
Who is he?
Warren Buffett's probably the greatest investor of of this country and perhaps of all time for as far as what he's been able to do with his groups. Not in New York City. He doesn't want to be there, as I understand, because I mean the information he gets it out there, but he wants to be surrounded by what the people are and what the people are thinking, what the trends are in there, instead of being right in the water and maybe not being able to judge what your environment really is.
When we started this off, Mr. Samora mentioned that one of the thrills of your year was going with Mr. Batavia, who is a member of your White House Fellows Group, to the Great Wall of China. All of you go back to that experience. How much did you travel? And how did you get him up there to the top of the Great Wall of China?
Joseph was the yeoman on it.
That's right.
I tease and say I was the one with shoulders. And so, no, actually, all of us contributed towards that. We do 2 domestic trips and 1 international trip, and the group gets to decide where we want to go for each of those trips. And after extensive debate and suggestions, we decided that this year for our domestic trips, that for one we'd go to New York, and for the second we'd go to California, where we recently returned from Los Angeles and San Francisco. And for the international trip, we decided ultimately to go to Tokyo, then to Seoul, Beijing, and then Hong Kong. And it was, of course, in Beijing that we went to the Great Wall.
And how did you, and you say Mr. Batavia is handicapped?
Quadriplegic.
Quadriplegic?
Yes, sir.
How did you get him there?
Well,
by the way, first of all, where is he from, and what department was he in as a fellow?
He's with the Attorney General's office, and originally, he's living in Washington now and has been the last few years as a healthcare researcher in the healthcare field.
And also has a JD from Harvard and MD, or Master's in Medicine from Stanford. Very impressive guy.
And how long has he been a quadriplegic?
Since 16.
16 years old.
And
so,
accident.
Again, the personal story of how did you get him to the wall?
Well, we took a van out to, as I understand it, and my colleagues can certainly correct me, this is the new part of the Great Wall that is open and has a tram. And much like we have a tram actually back in Albuquerque, so I was kind of familiar with how we were going to have to actually time getting Drew and his chair onto the tram car. And so it was a matter of literally lifting and everyone contributing towards that. And all 11 of us at different times pushed in the chair, and with his assistant Cheryl, who traveled with us. We just kind of all literally lifted and maneuvered, and some people engineered and some people gave us a lot of advice, and we lifted, and it was step by step to ultimately the tram car, and then actually timing both the chair and lifting Drew into the car, going up there, and again timing it so that we could get him off the tram chair, and then we had more lifting to do, and it was again step by step until we ultimately made it all the way up to the wall.
Once you got to the wall, what was your reaction? The wall.
You have the sense that you're on the top of the world, that, you know, with the view of just the stonework behind, and all of us being up there, you know, sort of looking out over the lands of China.
It's a beautiful day. I don't think we'll ever forget that. And just kind of share that with Drew and all 12 of us. It was just, and with Marcy, the director of the program, and Lynn, the education director, it was just it's a neat experience.
What did you think of China? And had you been there before?
2 of us had been. I don't think you had been. Had you been to China before,
I'd never
Joseph?
crossed an ocean.
Okay. Kimberly and I had been to China before. I'd been there in 1984 previously. I was impressed the amount of development that's taken place since 1984 into China. I guess perhaps I shouldn't be reading the numbers and seeing the statistics, but with the 1989 Tiananmen activity, I really thought that the thing would be shut down much more economically than what it appeared to me to be and what their trade numbers are showing right now. I was impressed with the economic activity. We were only in Beijing, so to say you judge China by Beijing would be unfair, but I was pretty impressed by the economic activity.
What do you remember from your Seoul stop, Seoul, Korea?
Well, I think that traveling to the DMZ in fact, I'll never forget that in terms of having the opportunity to go and take a look at that. We actually crossed the border, if you will, in one small area into North Korea and were viewed by North Korean soldiers, and to realize that that was indeed such hostile territories, just actually having the experience of Desert Storm and now realizing that this was such an incredible part of the planet, if you will, and we were being watched by North Korean soldiers and experiencing that. That was quite interesting. And we also got to see at least the remnants of what was some student protests, and we all got a little tear gas in our eyes as a result of that as well.
You'd been to Japan and lived there. What was your impression this time on this trip with your group?
Again, it was rather brief. We were only there for 2 days, but one of the most interesting things was we kicked off meeting with Akio Morita, the chairman of Sony, and he and the other professor having just written the book, Japan That Can Say No. We got into some interesting discussions about American competitiveness and America's trade relationship with Japan. So that was very interesting. And primarily in Japan, we did focus on economic issues.
You're talking about because we talked about a lot here on this network, the Diet member Ishihara, who wrote the book with Mr. Morita.
Right.
What did you sense are the feelings over there about the United States? Mr. Morita help you better understand what he really thinks?
Well, he did, I think. Now, I may have come away with an inappropriate perception, but my concern has been the direct investment here versus there, and I'm for them to being able to direct invest in this country. Kimberly and I have lively discussions on this. I think, though, that they have some barriers to our direct investment in Japan. And if you look at the numbers, the overwhelming amount of investment here versus our investment in Japan, I asked Mr. Morita about that. Why can't we buy Japanese corporations? You come over here and can buy American corporations. He says, well, Japanese corporations, these are like family to us, and you don't sell off members of the family. Which, by then their inference, that means our corporations are not family members, or that we're some sort of people that will sell off family members. And you could see the closeness that they knit within their corporate structure. And I continue to be very concerned about that direct investment and allowance by Japan of foreign investment in their country.
Now, when you go on these trips, and you went to California and New York, did you go as a group with a lot of doors being open for you?
Certainly access to the speakers. I mean, all of that is coordinated through the White House Fellows Association and the alumni. And so we definitely got access to a lot of people that we certainly couldn't otherwise. And we do travel in a group, and we go, through each of the meetings each day, and usually activities at night.
Does the U.S. military fly you there?
Only once did we fly military transport, which was in part just to see how they do that. They did an in-air refueling, which was interesting, and then we flew to SAC headquarters to learn about sort of the nuclear deterrence initiatives.
In Omaha.
In Omaha, right, which was fascinating. But in general, we just fly regular commercial aircraft at the government rate.
How about your trip to New York? What'd you do there?
Well, we had a chance to meet with the investment community. We had an opportunity to meet with Mayor Dinkins, Education Chancellor Fernandez, and we had a chance to go to Harlem and see some of the issues that were relative there. It was kind of this is early on in the year, and so it was also an opportunity for our class to experience, I think, a lot of fellowship right up front.
Change your mind on anything?
Not particularly. I think there are a lot of difficult issues facing New York City. I think there are a lot of local issues that municipalities are generally wrestling with now. It was interesting to compare and contrast that with the issues facing Mayor Bradley in LA, Mayor Agnos in San Francisco, and there's a lot of tough issues that are being, that mayors and municipal governments are wrestling with.
What'd you learn in California?
Learned the diversity of problems facing an enormous economy, enormous dynamic economy. Being California is what got the 6th largest economy if you took it as an economy in the world. And they've got great opportunities and enormous issues with all that influx of people, resources into there. And there's a diverse set of problems. We talked with an AIDS activist, too, author of a book the band played on about AIDS politics, talked on political issues, gang issues, talked with one of the key investment people of KKR and Bank of America, so economic issues. It's just grand scale of issues that are all in that crucible of California.
What do you, as a group, this has been a nice, pleasant conversation. Everybody's agreeing here by and large, but do you...
You haven't asked us on the issues, no.
Yeah, but what's the biggest issue that you, as a group, when you get into conversation, disagree on the most? I mean, after a year in this town, where's the division?
I think one is actually the role of the government, what sorts of activities the government should be involved in, and that does bring you into sort of the classic sort of splits between Democrats and Republicans. When we have met with these different people and looked at the different issues, it's sort of like, should the government be involved or not, and then if the government should be involved, what's the vision for the program or the solution? And I think, it's at a large scale that overlays a lot of the individual discussions that we've then had of what should government be doing in education, how active should it be in healthcare policy, how active should it be in formulating a trade approach, all those sorts of things. It's sort of what is the role of the government in the big picture.
The three of you undoubtedly have your favorite government program or your favorite government program that doesn't work. Let me try either one of those with you. I mean, after watching government for a number of years and after being involved in it, what's your favorite? What works?
I think our trade policy, I'll jump in on one quick one, is our trade policy. I do think what the President and Carla Hills and the group at USTR, Clayton Yiter at Agriculture, are doing in terms of really pushing the opening of markets abroad, and particularly in Japan and Europe, is a program that is working. It's difficult to push it as far as it needs to go, but we're certainly moving in the proper direction.
Got one?
I sure wish Congress would work a little bit more. Perhaps that's a bias from having worked in the executive branch for a short period of time. I sure like to see them move on some particular issues, and to see them, to use the old proverbial, drag their feet on occasion. It's kind of tough to watch that when I think they could wrestle with some issues a lot more quickly.
Work more or do things your way?
Perhaps a little of both.
Get a program?
And the one that works, I think, is the Defense Department, from what I've been able to see, for as far as 40 years standing firm against communism and the fall of the wall taking place. Now, others say there are different factors than defense. Defense was clearly an issue and a factor with that took the threat of communism on away. I think that's one that works. I think one that doesn't work is just maybe the bifurcated nature of making legislation between executive and legislative branch, and that almost permanent division between Republican and Democrat on those two has stalled us on getting a lot of difficult problems handled in the government.
We only have about 3 minutes left. I don't know if this will be a final question, but let me and take your time to answer this. But as long as it's not more than a minute. What is the biggest impact that will be left on you from this experience of a year as a White House fellow?
Is that fundamentally the government does work, it's a good thing, and that individuals can make a difference. And so that it sort of creates in me the desire to eventually sort of make some contribution through the government sort of system.
Does that make you a Democrat?
Makes me still undecided 1 hour later.
With that exception, it's public service, and regardless of time in your life, I think it's an obligation. I think that no matter how you do it, whether it's a community involvement, whether it's accepting a government job at some particular point in time, whether appointed or elective, it's absolutely critical that everyone realize that it's an obligation and that you should be involved. Along the lines, perhaps even as the Point of Lights program that the President has, in terms of any kind of volunteer service to kind of get in there and help your respective communities and help your fellow mankind and womankind.
Public service and the need for government to downsize, I think, to deal with deficit and income flow problems that we have, probably the thing I'll be left with.
Let me go back to asking whether you're a Democrat. Let me ask all of you. The supposition is that Democrats like government and Republicans don't. You've all been around a lot of Republicans. Is that a fair accusation? That Republicans don't think government works?
As much as you categorize any broad grouping of people, and there are always going to be people on edges, I'd say that's more true than not true.
Mr. Samora?
I think everyone cares in this town, if you will, especially in the political times, about government and wanting to make it work. And I think there's that fundamental common denominator personally.
Yeah, I agree. I think both sides actually want to see get rid of all the excess in government and have the government that we do have work within the budget that it does have to be the most effective that it can be. And I think there are people on both sides that want to do that. And then the question is really, what are the priorities within the resources that you have? And I think that's where the differences come.
Let me make the rounds and tell everybody a little bit more about our three guests, and then we'll close her down. Kimberly Till is originally from Prattville, Alabama. She has a bachelor's in history from the University of Alabama. She has a law degree from Duke, and she is a White House fellow serving with the FBI Director, Judge William Sessions. And prior to the White House Fellowship, she was with an international management consultant firm called Bain & Company in London, and she also was a Henry Luce Fellow in Japan. And Joseph Zamora, Jr., White House Fellow serving with the Public Liaison Office of the Executive Office of the President, Bobby Kilberg, was chairman of the New Mexico Public Service Commission before coming to the White House Fellowship, has a law degree from the University of New Mexico, a communications degree from the University of New Mexico, a bachelor's of science, is originally from Albuquerque, and also was a volunteer in the Big Brother program. And finally, Sam Brownback, White House Fellow serving with the Ambassador's Office, Julius Katz, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, previously was Kansas Secretary of Agriculture, practiced law in Manhattan, Kansas, also co-authored 2 books on agricultural law, has a law degree from the University of Kansas, a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Economics from Kansas State University, and is a native of Parker, Kansas. Thank you all very much. We are out of time, and to our audience, have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This White House Fellows conversation will re-air on C-SPAN Saturday night at 10:30 Eastern Time, 7:30 Pacific. And for more information, you can write to the President's Commission on White House Fellowships. The address is 712 Jackson Place, Northwest, Washington, D.C. The zip code is 20503. Up next, spokesmen for the Population Reference Bureau discuss the findings of their new demographic study titled African Americans in the 90s.
Recently,